Hello. Let's make a coffee cozy today. We'll need some chunky yarn. This is Woolies Thick and Quick and number 13 needles. I've got a pattern up that you can follow along with. That's at pearlsandpixels.com, but let's just go ahead and get started by casting on 8 stitches. We'll use the long tail cast on. So we'll pull a little bit of yarn out of the ball, make a slip knot, and put that on our needle. Tighten it up, and then we will cast on another 7 stitches because that slip knot counts as 1 stitch. So there's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 stitches, cast onto the needle, and then we will turn our work, which just means flip it over and put it in your other hand. Pick up the yarn, the working yarn coming from the ball, not the yarn tail. And we'll just start knitting every single row until we reach about 9 inches. We will knit every single stitch in the row. So just a review on how to make the knit stitch. In through the front leg, grab that piece of working yarn and pull it through, slide it off, grab, pull through, slide off. And when you reach the end of the row and you have no more stitches left on the left side needle, you'll need to turn your work again. Flip it over, put the stitches in the left hand and the empty needle in your right hand, and keep going. Again, we'll knit every stitch in the row, all 8 stitches in every row should be a knit stitch. And one more time, just so you really see it, get the idea. We're going to turn our work again. Yarn will go behind. When you do knit stitches, it always goes behind. And knit another row. Insert through the front leg, grab, bring through, and slide off. And we will just continue this process for what looks like another 8 inches. We want 9 inches total to make this cup cozy big enough. So here we go. I may speed it up just a little bit since I've shown you the process. Okay, let's do a quick measure right now. We need to get 9 inches. What do we have here? Oh, let's see. One more row and we'll have our 9 inches. So just a reminder to knit, pulling the yarn from the back through and slipping it off, knit, pull through, all right, and now it's time to bind off. So again, we'll turn our work, yarn in back because we'll be doing knit stitches. And for this bind off, we will knit 2, 1, 2, then slip the first stitch over the second, pulling the second through, leaving the second stitch on the right needle. We'll do it again with one more knit so that there are 2 stitches on the needle. Pull the first stitch, lift it over the second stitch, bring that second stitch through and slide it off to the right hand needle. And we'll continue this, having 2 stitches on the needle at most during the bind off, sliding the first over the second and moving it to the right hand needle. Again. And then as we come to the last stitch, we've got our last 2. First stitch over the second and bring it through, off to the right hand needle. Left hand needle is free now, and we'll be able to remove the knitting from the needles. We'll need scissors for this part. We'll clip off that working yarn, leaving a tail of between 8 and 10 inches. And then you simply pull that stitch through to fasten off the end. Your knitting needles can go away. Give it a good stretch to make sure all your stitches are intact. And then we're going to weave in our loose ends before we add some buttons. So to weave in our ends, we'll need a darning needle. This one's big and plastic because the smaller metal ones don't tend to fit on the chunky, bulky yarns. So what we'll do is thread our darning needle as best we can. It's gonna be a little tricky, but you can do it, I promise. Slip it on that darning needle. Okay, and we'll start with this bind off edge. That was where we stopped our knitting. And we'll take the yarn and fix this little kind of loose loop here. So we'll take the knitting needle up and through the stitch right below where it was bound off. Pull that through, and it's going to neaten up the edge a little bit. And then I like to come back down through this loop where we ended, just to make it match the pattern a little bit. Okay, so I'll go through here, and then looking at the back, I'm going through a second stitch right below. And we pull through, and then stretch a little to neaten up that edge. And you'll see we have gone down about a row, and we can tie off this loose end. If you prefer to weave in your ends, you'll need to follow the pattern with this extra tail. But for me, I go down and I pick a stitch to anchor to. So I'm going to anchor onto this stitch. So I'll bring my yarn under and through that stitch. Not too tight so that you don't ruin your tension in the end of the pattern here. And then we're going to set it down, remove the yarn from the darning needle, and we're going to split the yarn in half. This is a 2-ply yarn. That means there are basically 2 pieces of string wound together to create the yarn. So we'll split it in half, 1 ply on each side. And then we'll take one of those ends and put it back on the darning needle. And again, nice fluffy wool is sometimes tricky to finish out with, but I promise you can do it. There we go, on the darning needle. Okay, then we're going to pick up that piece and look closely at the stitch where the yarn is coming from, and we're going to loop half of that yarn that is on the darning needle back around that same stitch so it comes out just next to the other side of the yarn. And then they're going to be laying parallel to each other. We can set the darning needle aside for a moment, and we're going to tie a knot. So we'll lay the strands in opposite directions, and with opposite hands, we're going to pick up each side. All right, we'll cross and then go through, pulling the knot just to the surface of your knitting. If you pull too tight on the first knot, you will make some problems with your tension. Set those 2 ends down again in opposite directions. Pick them up again with opposite hands. Cross in the exact same way. Bring it through, and this time we'll pull tighter. Now with this wool yarn, if you pull too tight, it will break in your hands. But if you notice that your knot is not slipping, you're done. You can go ahead and trim off the extra tail here. If your knot did slip when you did that, you need to make 1 more knot in the same way. But since my knot didn't slip, we will clip as close to the knot as possible. Let me show you even more zoomed in right there. We don't want to clip the knot, just the yarn. As you see, there's a little knot, and then we'll stretch the piece, and that tiny knot hides itself, and that tail is gone. We'll have to do the other tail now. This is the cast on tail, so we'll pick that up and repeat the process, putting the yarn tail on that darning needle, now this end, the cast on end, is a little more simple. It doesn't really need any stitches fixed per se. There isn't a loose stitch like you would have with most of those bind offs. So I just pick a stitch to go down through and draw the yarn into the knitting. And I'm just going to find a stitch to anchor to and tie my knot. It's going to be this one today. So draw that yarn through the stitch as we did before, but not too tight. See, if you pull it too tight, it messes up your tension. So make sure it's loose and the same tightness as the rest. And then we'll do what we did last time, splitting this yarn tail in half. And we'll put 1/2 back on that darning needle. And again, we find the stitch we were going to anchor to, go around it to bring the yarn back down next to the other side. Pull that tight, but not too tight. And then we can take it off the darning needle, set that aside, and tie our knot. So again, opposite hands, opposite strands, cross, through, pull to the surface, but not too tight, drop the strands, opposite hands, opposite strings, cross, make a knot, bring it tight, but not too tight that you break your strands of yarn. If it slips, drop the yarn and make another in the same way, but this one didn't slip, so we can clip off the ends right next to the tiny knot, but don't clip the knot. Okay, discard that. See our knot? Make it disappear by stretching the project. And this is a tiny bit of blocking as well, making your piece even out. And now we're ready to add our buttons. For this cup cozy, we'll need 3 buttons. I've got some cute little clear sparkly crystal buttons here. About 3/4 of an inch is a really good size. That's 19 millimeters. But really what you want to ensure is that these buttons are going to be the right size, that if you pick one of your knitting holes, just the natural holes that are there, that the button will go through it, but not so easily that the button's going to not hold in place. So about 3/4 of an inch, 19 millimeter buttons are great. We're going to pick an end to put the buttons on. And once the buttons are on, it will be a cute little cozy that you can button onto your favorite mug. So we also need some sewing thread and a sewing needle to put buttons onto this piece. I'm going to put the buttons on the edge. That is the cast on edge right here. And the buttons will go 1, 2, 3, one on each end and then one in the middle. To sew a button on, you'll need to get some of this sewing thread and make sure you pick a pretty color that matches your yarn. Take, I'd say about 2 feet worth of that yarn and unwind it. And then go ahead and trim the end off the spool. Oh, where is it? There it is. Set that aside for now. And we're going to thread this teeny little thread, I hope you can see it, onto a tiny sewing needle. See if we can get in focus for you. There you go. And you find the eye of the needle, thread it through, and there are little tools to help you do this too if that's tricky for you. But then we're going to take the thread and double it up. So make sure that your sewing needle is right in the middle of the 2 strands. Okay, once it's roughly even, you can tie a knot in the thread. And again, as you see, mine's not perfect, so it doesn't have to be perfectly even. Now for this, I like to leave a good little tail after the knot, and that's going to help tie the button on at the end. Make a knot, And then we'll take our first button and place it near the edge of this knitting, and we'll pick a stitch to basically sew it onto. So this will be our stitch to sew onto. So we start by putting our needle through that stitch, but don't pull it all the way through. Okay. Then split the strands of the thread with your sewing needle and put it between there. When we do this and pull up to the knot, it anchors to the knitting pattern. Then put your button on. And we will sew that on by just going through each buttonhole and back around the stitch we chose to sew onto. Make sure you pull that thread pretty tightly, and then go back up through the buttonhole and around in the same way until it feels nice and sturdy. Let's do one more just for good measure. And through, but this time we're not going to bring it back up through the buttonhole, we're going to tie it off. The reason I like to leave a little extra thread tail is so I can tie the same kind of knot we tied to end our knitting to end the button. So I'll wrap one of those strands around the button, and then we'll tie a knot like we did before. You can cut the needle off so you don't poke yourself tying the knot. Lay those two ends out separately. Opposite hands, opposite strings. Make sure you've got two little threads in each hand. Cross it, make a knot, and pull that as tightly as you can without breaking the string. And we'll do another knot to secure it. Same thing. Opposite hands, opposite strings, knot, pull tight, and since the thread is slippery, I like to do a third one just in case. And pull through and pull it tight. We will trim off those little extra ends the same way as we did before. Cut the thread, not the knot, on both sides. And we have one button. You give it a nice little stretch, make sure it's going to stay. That looks pretty good. On to the next two. We'll do them in the same way as we did this button, placing one in the middle and one on the end. But I'm going to go ahead and speed this process up for you because each one is done in the exact same way, just in a different location. Look at that, we have all our buttons attached. And that is the completed cup cozy, but let me show you how it works now. I've got my little mug here. You'll take it, you'll bring the button-free end through your handle. Notice this one's empty. Please don't do this on its side with a full cup. That would not work well. But then wrap it around and it's going to stretch, and that's great. And find the matching hole in your knitting that you can run the button through. You didn't even need to make buttonholes because these are naturally going to work. Okay, do the bottom one next. Right through the hole. Make sure it's lined up all pretty. And do your middle one to secure it in. And there you have it. Cute, adorable little cup cozy for your favorite mug. I've also tried this version on a regular ceramic mug, and it works great too. I had a different color, and you can even embellish it. Look at that. I added a little flower. It's very cute. And they're fun to drink out of. If you would like the pattern, again, that can be found at pearlsandpixels.com, P-U-R-L-S and pixels.com. The pattern here is free, and I hope you have fun making it. Thank you for knitting along with me.